Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. So this started out as a review of Aladdin, but it's ended up being something very different. The truth is, Aladdin is kind of exactly what I expected it to be. A perfectly watchable, if pretty dull and unnecessary retread of the animated classic. It adds a new song or two, makes Jasmine a slightly more well-rounded character, and Jafar a less interesting one. But ultimately it just feels kind of lifeless. Except when Will Smith is on screen. An actor so likable, he manages to overcome the creepy CG and make any scene he's in completely and totally his own. And that surprised me a little bit, but honestly, it really shouldn't have. When I was growing up, the guy was one of the most successful movie stars in the world, and I've been a fan for a long time. Back in middle school, I watched every episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on Nick at Night. I would watch and rewatch iRobot on DVD. A few years later, I was even there opening weekend to see the mildly bizarre 7 Pounds, a movie that ends with him committing suicide via jellyfish. Whatever Smith wanted to try out, I was pretty on board. But eventually, that just kinda stopped. I skipped out on movies like Concussion and After Earth. And honestly, though there's a lot of Will Smith movies I really like, there's very few that I would actually call great. Why is that? Well, this week I want to take a deep dive into the career of Will Smith, and why I think his work is fantastic and kind of frustrating at the same time. If Will Smith had been born in like 2002, I'm convinced he would have gotten his start as a successful vlogger and SoundCloud rapper. Because in many ways, he has that same quality that so many vloggers aspire to. The ability to just come off as a fun, down-to-earth person who you'd really want to hang out with. Which is probably why, even at 50 years old, he still fits into that vlogger space really well on YouTube. But instead, he was the Fresh Prince. The Fresh Prince's music was relatable and goofy, in the way that Instagram comedy tries to be. It was about fairly universal experiences. Showing up to the first day of school and feeling like everyone is judging you for wearing the wrong clothes, trying to get your parents to let you borrow the car, all delivered with a lot of fun lyrics and plenty of mugging for the camera. That was enough to make DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince's second album, 1988's He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper, into a massive hit. But its follow-up, And in This Corner, didn't do nearly as well, leaving the 21-year-old Will Smith deep in debt and in some trouble with the IRS. But Quincy Jones, a legendary music producer for artists like Michael Jackson and Frank Sinatra, let Smith, who, remember, up to this point had no acting experience outside of a few music videos, audition in front of NBC executives right in the middle of his living room, with a script from a random failed TV pilot. And even with no training or even much time to familiarize himself with the lines, everyone in the room was immediately on board. The Will Smith character in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air laid the foundation of his star persona that's remained mostly intact today. The Will Smith character is confident but not untouchable. He might do some really goofy stuff and even be the butt of a lot of jokes, but there's never any doubt that he's the most fun guy in the room. And maybe most importantly, he's cool without ever really being edgy. That was the Will Smith of the show, and honestly, it's still a persona that's really serving him well, since this basically describes the genie in the Aladdin remake as well. After The Fresh Prince, movies like Independence Day and Bad Boys would turn Smith into a certified blockbuster star, and add a little bit more maturity and a lot more action credibility to the Will Smith brand. But that persona has remained incredibly durable, and what drives most of, though not all, his biggest hits. And look, far be it for me to really criticize the fun, likable movie persona that Will Smith has built his career on. Like, obviously it's serving him really well, but I think over the years it's also proved to be a little limiting. Before Bad Boys, when he was just a regular old sitcom star, he took a supporting role in 6 Degrees of Separation. It's maybe the only time that Will Smith has ever really disappeared into a role. In fact, Smith himself has even said it's the one time in his career that he tried method acting. And I think it worked. Like, he's a real highlight of that movie. But small, interesting parts like this aren't really something he'd almost ever go back to. After Independence Day, if Will Smith was in a movie, audiences expected to see the kind of performance they had come to know and love from him. In the mid to late 90s, Tom Cruise was in a similar situation. People knew what a Tom Cruise performance was, and he fully embraced that. But at the same time, I think Cruise did something that Smith, even to this day, hasn't really been willing to do. Completely place his trust in a major director and just kind of let them steer the ship. In 1999, Cruise was in two of the most interesting films of his whole career, Magnolia and Eyes Wide Shut, both made by genius and very unique directors that the actor clearly had a ton of respect for. And the thing is, these are both deeply weird movies, and Cruise's role in Magnolia, probably the single best acting performance he's ever given in my opinion, isn't even that big, and he plays a creepy dirtbag, turning that Tom Cruise charm completely on its head, something that director Paul Thomas Anderson obviously really likes doing, and would do again a few years later with Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. I just can't see Will Smith taking a role like this, ever. Sure, he'll take on serious roles, and he'll even be in movies that are kinda strange and out there, but he's never been totally willing to subvert his persona in service of a director's story, and I'm not sure that's something he ever has much interest in doing. Like, Tom Cruise is the star of Eyes Wide Shut, but it's thought of first and foremost as a Stanley Kubrick film. Will Smith does Will Smith movies. Like, can you tell me who directed Shark Tale or Men in Black off the top of your head? Because I sure can't. This isn't to say that Smith never works with well-known directors. Michael Bay, love him or hate him, is definitely a big name, and he starred in Michael Mann's Ali. But let's be honest, taking a role as a beloved celebrity in a very by-the-numbers biopic isn't exactly the riskiest move, and is probably the easiest way to score an Oscar nomination, which is what he did. That's not to say the movie is bad, but it's definitely not the sort of risk that Cruise was taking in Magnolia. There's a really great clip of Will Smith explaining why he didn't end up starring in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, where he basically says that he wanted the film to be more about the relationship between Django and his wife.
But with that story, I felt the only way I could make that movie is it had to be a love story, not a vengeance story.
And he was uncomfortable with the fact that Django ultimately solved his problems through violence. Which I understand. Django is a movie that ends with a very long and brutally gory shootout, where the main character kills dozens of men without remorse. That's not something a Will Smith character would usually do, and I think for him, that was a bridge too far. I'm not saying that Smith should have done the movie even if he was uncomfortable with the script, but I do think that instinct to stay locked into what his brand has always been is kind of disappointing. Of course, Smith has given other subdued performances, in things like The Pursuit of Happiness, 7 Pounds, and Concussion. But one serious Smith performance towers above the rest at the box office: I Am Legend. And for good reason. I think he's really great in this role, in a movie that's mostly just him and a dog. But I still think it's a great example of Smith being very calculated in the kind of characters that he's willing to play. See, I'm a big fan of the original I Am Legend, and I think the differences between that story and the movie version are pretty telling. The 1954 novel has the infected vampires becoming more intelligent over time, to the point where, at the end of it, they're just as smart as humans were and are building a new society, while our main character still tries in vain to find a cure. By the end, he accepts the fact that he's a remnant of a world that no longer exists, and fighting to get back to that old world won't really help anyone, since everyone else has already moved on and is creating something new. While he's basically the only living legend of what once was. And when he finally accepts this, he's able to die a peaceful death. This is about as far from the Will Smith movie as you could get, which ends with the character inventing a cure and then sacrificing himself for the greater good, allowing a mother and her child to escape and take the cure to the remaining human survivors. Taken on its own, this isn't an awful ending or anything, but it's a lot more conventional and less interesting than the novel's conclusion, and it kind of robs the story of its central theme. The book is about an aging man coming to accept the fact that the world around him is going to change in ways that he doesn't like and can't fully understand, while the movie is about Will Smith being an incredible hero who comes through for the entire human race when the chips are down. So even with the much darker tone, it still fits the Smith brand just about as well as Independence Day or I, Robot did. Speaking of I, Robot, that's another example of the entire point of the book being demolished in the name of giving Smith a more traditional hero character arc, And that one might annoy me even more because it turns the best character in the book, Susan Calvin, into a really two-dimensional love interest. But honestly, that rant could be a whole other video.
Converse All-Stars, vintage 2004.
The point I'm trying to make is clear. When Will Smith comes aboard a project, Smith and maybe the studio's instinct seems to be to make sure that most darker or uncomfortable aspects of the story are scrubbed in favor of maintaining his brand. I mean, even look at something like Suicide Squad, where Smith's Deadshot is just about the least evil and most sympathetic the character has ever been. Even when he's playing the world's most deadly assassin that kills for money, Smith plays the nicest and least morally compromised version of him possible. This goes for his weirder projects too. Things like 7 Pounds and Collateral Beauty are both very strange and honestly bad movies, but they both have very digestible and unsubtle messages that would honestly fit right in a children's storybook. Almost nothing in a Will Smith movie can ever really be ambiguous or leave you with any lingering questions. Now, if this sounds really harsh, I don't really mean it to be. The truth is, some bad movies aside, Smith's formula for success usually works. He's always fun to watch on screen, and if iRobot or Men in Black was on TV right now, I would happily sit down and just watch the whole thing. My point isn't that the Will Smith brand produces bad movies, because I think he's in a lot of good stuff. It's just that I wish he would push himself outside his comfort zone more as he ages and work with interesting directors on more unique projects. Aladdin is the opposite of that. He's really good in the movie, but it's Will Smith just adding the thing he does well to a very well-known Disney brand, which is about as safe a bet as you could get. But I am hopeful that his next movie, Ang Lee's Gemini Man, sees him stretch himself a little bit as an actor. No matter where his career goes though, I'm sure I'll still check in. Because even in 2019, probably more than a decade after his heyday, I still think he's probably Hollywood's most charismatic actor. So okay, I would totally understand if right now you felt like watching a Will Smith movie on Netflix, but if you travel, especially overseas, that can be a big headache. That's where Dashlane comes in. With Dashlane's VPN service, you can travel abroad while not having to give up the streaming services of home. And if you travel a lot, that's really great to have. But of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what Dashlane has to offer. What I really love about it is the convenience. Instead of needing to remember a million different passwords that are all just kind of floating around online, Dashlane gives me one safe and secure place to store all of that. It does the job of 3 or 4 different online security programs at once, and it does it at a much cheaper price. So you don't need to worry about data breaches or password hacks. And on top of all of that, you can watch like I Am Legend on Netflix hassle-free wherever you are. All at a great price. Now Dashlane Premium is only $4.99 a month, but you can get an even better price by being one of the first 200 people to go to dashlane.com/midnight and entering the promo code MIDNIGHT to get 10% off. You can find that link in the description below, and remember to use the promo code MIDNIGHT.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.